At the reading of my grandfather's will, my uncle referred to me as a charity case. Subsequently, the attorney engaged in a game. During the reading of my grandfather's will, my uncle approached me, reduced his voice, and stated, "You were merely his charity case." It felt like a slap to me. It was not loud or public, but it was sharp enough to cut through a part of me that I was unaware was still tender. My cousin Tessa, who was seated 2 seats away in a silk dress that was too bright for a funeral, laughed without even glancing up from her phone. She stated that he only tolerated you out of pity, as if it were a fact that we had all agreed upon years ago. I refrained from uttering any words. I maintained my composure. That was the policy. Silence is a form of protection in this family, while speaking up is a means of gaining strength. I had acquired this knowledge at an early age. The vast dining table in my grandfather's estate was the focal point of our gathering. Old family portraits that appeared to be oil paintings of strangers were situated around a heavy oak that was far longer than was necessary. Lemon varnish and tension emanated from the room. Calvin, my uncle, assumed the position of the head of the table as if it were his own. Tessa, who was weary and meticulously groomed, lounging next to him, was convinced that she was about to be involved in a significant event. And then there was me. Sarai, who is modest and average, is an outlier in this family of ruthless, loud, and glamorous individuals. I wore a plain black dress, with no designer label or pretensions of mourning. I was simply myself, clinging to the chair's edge as if I might collapse if I let go. I had arrived because I believed it was necessary, not because I had any expectations. Howard Monroe, my grandfather, was the one who reared me after my parents' deaths. However, he was never particularly affectionate. He was organized and productive. He provided me with shelter, sustenance, and access to his private tutors. However, he never expressed his affection or expressed his love for me. And yet a small, naive part of me hoped that there was a reason he had brought me in, something beyond obligation. The attorney cleared his voice. His name was Mr. Blanchard, and he was distinguished by his unassuming demeanor, tranquil voice, and crisp suit. Our family had known him for an eternity, and he was one of the few individuals who treated me with a fundamental level of respect. He commenced reading the will, and I prepared myself for the inevitable. Calvin acquired the antique vehicles, the stocks, and the real estate. Tessa received jewelry and a trust fund that had belonged to our great-grandmother. Businesslike and dispassionate was the tone. I awaited the call of my name. Nothing. Then Mr. Blanchard briefly halted, causing the room to sway. He stated, "There is one final item," while gazing directly at me. "A personal message was recorded by your grandfather. The production is intended for Sarai Monroe alone." Every individual's head rotated. "What type of instruction is it?" Calvin's tone was immediately defensive as he inquired. "Mr. Blanchard responded by removing a small silver flash drive from a leather case and sending a video message. He captured it just prior to his death. He was precise. Sarai's consent is required before it may be shared, discussed, or replayed in this room." Tessa's irises rolled back. "You are joking. Did he leave her a video? Is that the outcome she receives?" Calvin refrained from laughing. He regarded me as though I had stolen something. Nevertheless, I refrained from uttering a word. Just staring at the flash drive was my only activity. I was unable to feel my fingers as my hands were clenched so firmly in my lap. I was unaware of the contents of the message. There was a portion of me that did not wish to hear it, not in their presence, not if it substantiated their assertion that I was never more than a specter in that house. However, I was halted by something in Mr. Blanchard's demeanor. He did not regard me with sympathy. He appeared composed. Just as this was significant, as if he were aware that it was meaningful. I nodded once. He inserted the flash drive into the laptop. The room fell silent. Quietness that is not deferential or suspicious. Everyone was holding their breath, anticipating a sign that this was a prank, that I was on the brink of embarrassment. Once more, the shriek then erupted. Suddenly, the visage of my grandfather emerged.
pale, weary.
However, his irises were unclouded. And his initial words were, "Sarai, if you are listening to this, I have already departed. However, there are certain matters that you should be aware of." The entire space was frozen. Growing up in the Monroe family was akin to residing in a home where one error could render one invisible. The event was magnificent, featuring chandeliers, piano music during dinner, and guests who donned designer attire that resembled armor. Everything appeared to be in perfect condition from the outside. The interior was very chilly. I am Sarai Monroe. I was not born into this legacy. When I was 12 years old, my parents, James and Rebecca, were killed in an automobile accident. There was no one remaining to accommodate me. Consequently, my grandfather, Howard Monroe, assumed responsibility. The day he brought me to his estate, he did not say much. He has just presented me with a key to a guest room and instructed me to utilize it. He was a man who valued systems. He preferred his mornings to be tranquil, his documents to be ironed, and his family to be under control. He supported my education, ensured that I was adequately nourished, and maintained a respectful demeanor. However, he never addressed me as his granddaughter. Not a single time. The sole occasion on which I observed him smiling was when my cousin Tessa was admitted to an excessively expensive private academy. She was the type of girl who had her name sewn into her clothing, who scoffed at the assistants, and who only communicated with me when she required someone to fill in for her. Calvin, my uncle, was no better. After my grandfather's retirement, he assumed control of the Monroe business enterprise. Upon my arrival, he made it abundantly clear that I was not a member of the family. I was a stray that was brought in, a recollection of an incident that they had never intended to occur. Nevertheless, I maintained my composure. I diligently pursued my studies. I completed my education ahead of schedule. Calvin purchased lake houses that he never utilized, and I worked part-time jobs during the vacations while Tessa traveled to Europe. I was appreciative, regardless of the discomfort. I convinced myself that they would eventually recognize me if I maintained my distance for an extended period. But they did not truly perceive me. I continued to send birthday cards to my grandfather even after I moved out at the age of 21. I visited whenever I was able. When I was aware that the staff was absent, I bought provisions. He never requested it, nor did he express gratitude to me. He would simply nod once and return to his crossword puzzles. I did not shed the tears that I anticipated upon his passing. I had the sensation that an ancient entity had ultimately perished. The funeral was extravagant, tasteful, and attended by individuals who referred to him as a legend and a force. I was not concealing myself. Rather, I was unable to secure a seat in close proximity to the family. Consequently, I remained in the rear. It is not that I anticipated one. Just 2 weeks later, I received an email from Mr. Blanchard, the family counsel, who was as formal as ever. He requested that I attend the will reading at the Monroe estate. I found myself contemplating whether or not to attend. I was already aware of the impending event. Calvin would acquire everything. Tessa would receive sufficient compensation to maintain her self-assurance for an additional decade. If anything, I would receive a gentle pat on the back and a kind remark. Nevertheless, I attended. I donned a black dress that I had previously worn to a scholarship dinner. I maintained my hair in a bun and applied my makeup in a manner that resembled armor. Absence of ornamentation. There is no room for optimism. Upon entering the estate, I was struck by the uniformity of the atmosphere. The same dark wood floors. The same fragrance emanates from polished brass and withering florals. The paintings on the walls appeared to be anticipating that someone would disappoint them. Mr. Blanchard welcomed me at the entrance. He was courteous, but his expression was impenetrable. Calvin drummed the wood impatiently, his Rolex catching the light as he sat at the far end of the table. Tessa perused her phone as if the entire event were a complete waste of time. Upon my arrival, no one raised their head. I was not acknowledged by anyone. I sat in the center of the table, not too close to appear as though I belonged, but not too far to suggest that I was concealing myself. I did not have the intention of begging for anything. I merely desired to hear the final remarks of the man who had raised me, regardless of whether they were intended for me.
The chairs creaked.
The folder was opened by Mr. Blanchard, and my preconceived notions regarding this family began to unravel. The will reading commenced in the manner of a transaction. There are no tears. Absence of sentiment. The silence of the room was interrupted by the tranquil voice of Mr. Blanchard. I maintained my composure as he unfolded the legal documents in front of him and commenced perusing. He initiated the conversation with my son, Calvin Monroe. I relinquished complete ownership of the Monroe Properties portfolio, the Eastwood cabin, and the contents of my safety deposit box at First Federal Bank. Calvin did not respond. He sat with his arms crossed, as if he had anticipated this outcome from the beginning. He gave a slight, contented assent, as if he were merely verifying what he had already determined to be his. Mr. Blanchard continued. I bequeath the family jewelry, the contents of the Aspen storage unit, and the remaining assets of the Livingston Trust to my granddaughter, Tessa Monroe. Tessa briefly lifted her head from her phone to reveal a grin. She momentarily glanced at me, her lips quirking as if she intended to laugh. She refrained from doing so. It was unnecessary for her to do so. The message was unambiguous. Calvin acquired the power, Tessa acquired the glitter, and I waited. Mr. Blanchard halts, flicking to the final page. My heart began to beat rapidly. I reassured myself that I should not anticipate anything. However, it was still painful to wait in the same manner as an outsider who had drifted in from the street. He stated, "There is one final instruction," his tone altering slightly. Howard Monroe left behind a video recording and a personal message. This message is exclusively intended for Sarai Monroe. Calvin gradually turned his head at that moment. His eyes narrowed, but his expression remained unchanged. Tessa discontinued her scrolling. "What type of instruction is it?" Calvin inquired. His voice was composed, yet it was tense. Mr. Blanchard stated that it was a video. He recorded it during his penultimate week of life. He was exceedingly precise. It is prohibited from being shared or discussed. It is intended for Sarai and Sarai alone. Is there a message? The term was practically dripping with derision, as Tessa stated. Is that the outcome she receives? Is it not even a memento? Calvin further stated that she was scarcely related to him. He provided her with shelter and sustenance. That ought to have sufficed. I did not utter a single syllable. I maintained my gaze on the table in front of me, using my fingertips to trace the wood texture in an attempt to maintain my equilibrium. Mr. Blanchard stated, "I am of the opinion that Mr. Monroe's directives should be adhered to, while simultaneously displaying a Sarai acquiescence." Calvin reclined back, smiling as if he anticipated the outcome. He then instructed, "Go on. Let us hear the words of old Howard to his diminutive charity case." Tessa inhaled. "I vow, I will leave if the speaker delivers a speech that emphasizes the importance of hard work and maintaining a positive attitude." I could sense their words attempting to penetrate me, but I refrained from responding. That was the sole authority I had ever held in this family to prevent them from witnessing my downfall. I nodded once. The flash drive was connected by Mr. Blanchard. The room fell silent. There was no shuffling. There was no one who cleaned their throat. The house appeared to be retaining its breath, as if the air itself was still. The screen was illuminated. My grandfather's face was thinner than I recalled, but his eyes were piercing. He was attired in his customary navy sweater and gazed intently into the camera. He initiated the conversation with Sarai. "I am not present if you're viewing this." The room was filled with the sound of his voice, and everything underwent a transformation. No one spoke. Calvin's grin diminished. Tessa adjusted her posture in her chair. There was no indication of fatigue in his voice. He failed to convey an air of formality. He sounded like a man who had something genuine to say. He continued, "I never said much while I was alive, but there are things I need you to hear and things I should have told you a long time ago." I was paralyzed with fear. My jaw was clenched, and my fingertips were damp. I was unaware of the impending events. However, I could already sense their weight. Calvin's gaze shifted to mine from the opposite side of the table. He no longer appeared to be arrogant. He appeared apprehensive. The authority in the room had abruptly changed. For the first time in my life, everyone was mute, and they were all listening to a message that was exclusively intended for me. I do not recall inhaling during the video's playback. Despite the fact that my grandfather gazed directly into the camera, I felt as though he was gazing directly at me, as if he had been waiting his entire life to finally speak freely. He stated, "Sarai, you were never intended to be a burden. You were the sole individual who never requested anything." Behind me, I detected a movement. Tessa crossed her arms. Calvin appeared to be experiencing discomfort at this time. I refrained from moving. My grandfather continued, "You were 12 years old when you arrived here. Your parents were absent. I was not prepared for the addition of another child to the household, particularly in light of the events that transpired with Calvin's mother. Even though I never publicly acknowledged it, I took you in because your father was also my son." The sides of the chair were grasped by my palms. The sensation of my pulse was registered in my ears. I was unable to turn away from the screen, despite the fact that there was a ringing. "That is correct, Sarai. James Monroe, your father, was my firstborn. I harbored affection for him. However, he was not produced through matrimony." The decade in question was the 1960s. The situation was drastically different at that time. I was inexperienced, naive, and apprehensive about tarnishing the Monroe name. I committed an error. I allowed society to determine the type of father I could be. Tessa let out a squeak. Calvin did not speak. However, his complexion was becoming increasingly flushed. James was not raised by me. I disappointed him. I perceived a second opportunity in you after his death. I was unable to articulate the words. Openness was unfamiliar to me. However, I observed. I encountered you on a daily basis. I observed the extent of your dedication. I observed that you prioritized this family, despite the fact that no one ever did the same for you. I refrained from crying, despite the fact that my eyes were swollen. I was unable to shed tears in this location.
Not yet.
Not in their presence. You acted as Calvin's advocate when he utilized company funds to assist the unsuccessful startup. I am aware of it. You contributed a portion of the accountant's silence fee from your personal educational fund. Calvin's chair scraped as he sat back with greater force than before, eliciting a piercing sound. Suddenly, he regarded me as if I were alien. Tessa appeared perplexed. My grandfather stated that I failed to safeguard you in the manner that was expected of me. I permitted you to be treated as a guest in your own residence. That is my greatest regret. Therefore, I implemented the sole measure that I was confident would have an impact, even after my departure. Mr. Blanchard initiated a pause. I was bewildered and blank. He stated, standing slowly, "There is more. However, before we proceed, I must clarify a point." He extracted a slender black folder from his briefcase. "Mr. Monroe initiated a legal adoption several years ago. It was concluded. Sarai Monroe is legally his daughter. She is the sole, legitimate heir of his estate." Calvin rose from his seat. "This is a joke," he declared, his voice audibly rising. He exhibited signs of senility.
No, that was not realistic.
That was never addressed. Mr. Blanchard maintained his composure. He personally submitted it. Signatures that have been notarized are present. It is legally binding. Tessa gazed at me as if she were endeavoring to recollect each conversation we had ever had. Calvin leaned forward and grasped the table's edge. "He demanded that you were aware of this." "No," I replied, my tone stable. "I did not. And that was the reality. However, I was unaware of any of this information. I never foresaw that he would resort to legal proceedings to establish me as his own. I believed I was merely a person he kept around out of remorse. However, the entire foundation of my identity was now in a state of flux." Mr. Blanchard continued. Sarai, the legal heir, now possesses the majority control of Monroe Enterprises, the estate's primary residence, and the corporate voting rights that were transmitted to her in accordance with Howard Monroe's final will. The atmosphere was oppressive, not with pity or amusement, but with something more akin to dread. Every eye in the room was on me. I was no longer the female in the corner. I was the daughter, the heir, and the sole individual in whom Howard Monroe had placed his trust. I returned to the screen. Before the final segment was broadcast, my grandfather's expression was expressionless, as if he were immobilized in mid-thought. I nodded. Continue playing it. I required to hear everything at this time. Mr. Blanchard pressed the play button once more, and my grandfather's voice re-emerged. Although his tone remained consistent, there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. A heftier object. He was not merely leaving behind instructions. He was being entirely candid. For the first time, Monroe Enterprises was established with a single objective in view:
History.
I believed that this referred to wealth, properties, and the application of the Monroe name to structures. I was mistaken. He took a moment to catch his breath. Not as a result of frailty, but rather as a result of careful consideration. Legacy is not derived from the possessions we leave behind. It is in the individuals we influence and the ones we select when the world advises against it. Sarai, you were never merely someone I adopted. You were my second opportunity. I failed your father. You granted me the opportunity to rear his child, despite the fact that I did not deserve it. Calvin had reclined in his chair. His mandible was clenched. He had dark irises. He was no longer enraged. He was in the process of unraveling. Tessa gazed at the screen as if she were witnessing an unknown individual utter her grandfather's words. My grandfather continued, "You are the sole individual in this family who never told me a lie. You never exploited my identity to gain an advantage. You never solicited my assistance or attempted to influence my decisions. You have earned every possession you possess, and I ensured that no one could remove it from you." My larynx contracted. Each memory was recollected in pulses. While Tessa was out partying, I studied alone at night. When I was too embarrassed to seek assistance, I skipped meals in order to save money. I resolved the faulty sink independently, as the staff declined to address the issue. I was under the impression that no one had noticed. However, he had. He stated bluntly, "I am aware that this will incite them. Permit it." Throughout their entire lifetimes, they captivated my attention. I held you in high regard. This is the reason I have transferred the controlling shares of Monroe Enterprises to you. Your consent is now required for all executive decisions. You are no longer required to adhere to their regulations. It was located there. The words remained suspended in the air. Without a doubt. Calvin shifted in his seat as if the room had abruptly become too small. It was his empire, his boardrooms, his interactions. I now owned everything. Tessa appeared to be in a state of disorientation, as her appearance was devoid of arrogance. My grandfather's voice was more personal, and he bent forward slightly on the screen. Avoid the time-consuming process of demonstrating your capabilities to them. You have already completed the task. Proceed forward. Acquire what is yours. 12 years ago, you were the future of this family from the instant you entered my home. I was simply too haughty to express it. He briefly gazed downward, and upon his return, his tone became more gentle. This is the most important thing I would like you to bear in mind. I never considered you to be a burden. You were the source of my redemption. Suddenly, the screen went dark. No one relocated. Not even a murmur. There was no respiration. I gazed at the table in front of me before turning to Calvin. It was impossible to read his expression, as it had become rigid. He appeared to be a man who had recently witnessed the transfer of everything he had constructed to an individual whom he had never deemed deserving. Mr. Blanchard gingerly cleared his throat. That concludes the contents of Mr. Monroe's final statement. Calvin's voice was substantial, despite his sluggishness. "We will dispute this." Mr. Blanchard responded, "You are free to do so. However, I recommend that you review the corporate bylaws that your father revised last spring. In writing, he designated Sarai as his successor as CEO. It has already been submitted to the board. The transition has commenced. Tessa's gaze shifted from him to me. Her tone was subdued and apprehensive. Are you aware of this? I replied, no.
I did not, and I meant it.
I possessed no covert ambition, scheme, or plan. My sole aspiration was to experience a sense of belonging. I now held the keys to everything they believed would be theirs, without any prior notification. I rose from my seat. I was trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of finally being recognized. I did not speak out of malice. I spoke because it was time. I stated, "You made it abundantly clear that I was of no consequence," as I gazed between them. "You will now be required to determine how to coexist with the fact that I do." I then exited the room, not because I had anything to prove, but because for the first time in my life, I did not feel compelled to remain and listen. I did not return to the home after that day. I exited the estate and proceeded to my vehicle without checking my surroundings. The air outside was crisp, the type that causes a pleasant achy sensation in your airways. For the first time in what seemed like years, I sat behind the wheel, closed my eyes, and breathed. It was not about the organization. It was not even about the money. Hear him say it was what truly struck me. He caught sight of me. The truth had been entrusted to me by my grandfather, who had never expressed his affection for me. I finally had something tangible in that room, surrounded by individuals who had dedicated their lives to evaluating power, worth, and inheritance. I bore a name that held significance. Monroe was not the reason. Rather, he selected me. Everything underwent a transformation over the course of the subsequent weeks. The logistics were managed by Mr. Blanchard. He was both direct and efficient, frequently checking in without ever intruding. In order to verify the transition, the company board convened an emergency session. Calvin refrained from attending. Instead, he dispatched his attorney, who presented a stack of documents in an attempt to halt the transfer of control. It was unsuccessful. Howard Monroe was meticulous. Tessa shared a vague message on social media regarding family affairs and betrayal. I refrained from responding. It was unnecessary for me to do so. She made a single phone call and left a voicemail that began with a veneer of compassion and concluded with bitter resentment. I eliminated it. I did not relocate to a smaller residence in close proximity to the office due to necessity. Rather, I desired a personal space. There were no antique rugs or carved portraits, only pure lines, open light, and the sound of my own voice when I spoke aloud. Upon my arrival at Monroe Enterprises as the official majority shareholder, the receptionist appeared to anticipate another individual. Before she stood to buzz me in, I provided my identity and observed her eyes widen slightly. The office was crowded with individuals who had only heard my name in passing. The mute calculations, the doubt, and the curiosity were palpable. I, however, continued to trek. I recollected his words. Do not squander time demonstrating your capabilities. I was not present to impress anyone. I was present to serve as a leader. I continued to harbor inquiries in my personal life. What was the reason for his delay in informing me? Why did he not treat me differently during his lifetime? What was the reason for the ultimate recognition of death? I am not in possession of all the answers. It is unlikely that I will ever do so, but I am acquiring the ability to accept this reality. I visited his grave 1 month following the will reading. I did not bring any flowers. Rather, I submitted a letter that I had composed the previous evening. It was not characterized by resentment or forgiveness. It was sincere. I expressed my gratitude to him for finally disclosing the truth. I informed him that I would assume responsibility for his possessions, not for his legacy, but rather because I was capable of reassembling items that were destroyed. I have always had it. I left the letter at the base of the headstone and remained there until the wind increased. I then turned and strolled away. Occasionally, I continued to hear their voices. The echo of 1,000 minor dismissals that piled up over the years, Calvin's mockery, and Tess's laughter. However, their pain is no longer as intense. I maintain my composure. No, I do not shrunk. I have developed my own dialect at this time. I employ it in boardrooms, meetings, and other settings where individuals previously overlooked me. I am no longer the reserved lady who sits in the corner. I am the daughter of Howard Monroe, not solely by name, but by privilege. Additionally, I am Sarai. In its entirety, without reservation. Simple is the lesson that is conveyed throughout. Occasionally, the individuals who cause the most harm are those who never truly observed you. However, when someone eventually does, when someone chooses to leave you with the truth rather than just things, it transforms everything. It fails to dispel the agony. It does not rectify the past. However, it grants you the authority to compose the subsequent section independently. I am committed to ensuring that it is written carefully. I am grateful for your attention to my narrative. If it resonated with you, if you have ever experienced feelings of being overlooked, underestimated, or unwelcome, I hope this serves as a reminder that your value is not determined by the accolades you receive from others. It is determined by the experiences you endure and the person you become as a result. If you are moved by this narrative, please consider liking the video, sharing it with a friend who could benefit from it, and leaving a comment with your own story or observations. I have reviewed each and every one, and I would be delighted to receive your feedback. Additionally, to ensure that you never miss a video, switch on notifications and subscribe to the channel for additional true stories that explore the themes of family, truth, and resilience.